Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. Hey everybody, it's Lid Shaw, your host of Recording Studio Rockstars, coming to you from the Toy Box Studio, the sound of East Nashville. This show is here to introduce you to real-world recording professionals to hear their stories and learn from their experiences so that you can take your recordings to the next level and become a rock star of the recording studio yourself. Our guest today is Joe Gilder. He is a songwriter, producer, engineer, teacher, and innovator in the online world of music production, blogging, and podcasting. Joe's focus is on the home studio owner and helping you to create the best recordings you can. He's created a fantastic resource and website called HomeStudioCorner.com. In his own words, Home Studio Corner exists to help home studios excel. It gives you lots of ways to expand your recording knowledge, hone your recording skills, and make better recordings. That's for you, rock stars. Joe offers articles, videos, podcasts, and training products so that you can start learning for free now and dive in for much more in-depth training when you're ready. A couple of quotes from your site, Joe. People say great things about it. Your articles and videos have always been very easy to understand and implement. If I wouldn't have found your site, I may have given up trying to record. A lot of the other sites were just too hard to understand. That's a great testimonial from one of your customers.
Whoa.
So Joe is also the co-host of an awesome learning environment called Dueling Mixes with Graham Cochran. Dueling Mixes is a membership site where you can learn more about mixing through monthly multi-tracks and mixes for practice and interact with a supportive online community to have your mixes critiqued and gain helpful insights and tips. You can also learn more about all the great stuff Joe is teaching and Graham and follow his work and Graham's over at theproaudiofiles.com, which is where I first found you guys, another great resource for recording insights. Please welcome our guest, Joe Gilder. Joe, are you ready to rock, my friend?
I'm so ready to rock.
That is awesome, man. Well, welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I know we've tried to get together for an interview in the past, and for one reason or another, it didn't work, and I'm really excited to have you here now. I really appreciate you being here on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been a long time coming.
Well, so Joe, I've kind of done my best to introduce you to our rock stars. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and, where you come from and how you got into all this and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm a Mississippi boy. I grew up in small town Mississippi. Started playing music at a young age, got into writing songs, and at some point discovered recording and instantly got hooked. Came to the Nashville area to study recording and audio. With the intent of just being a regular rock star, not a studio rock star. And then just fell more in love with being on the other side of the glass and all the technical and creative stuff that goes into making a great sounding recording and a great sounding album. And from there, just continued to record my own music and other people's music, and actually worked for Sweetwater for a while, selling music gear. So, that's completely working in a toy store, which was great. And then after that, came back to Nashville, and while I was at Sweetwater, I started a little website called HomeStudioCorner.com to just share some of the stuff I was learning and trying in my own studio and my own recordings. And over the years, that's grown, and more people are finding it and finding it helpful, it seems.
Well, so you've been down in Nashville for a while, and you've got your site going. Tell us a little bit about your, well, first of all, you said you went to school for recording too. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, I'm an MTSU grad, so Middle Tennessee State here, just southeast of Nashville, and great experience. I say this all the time. I wish I had known more when I went into it. I didn't know anything, and I got to learn the ins and outs of a recording studio and all the techniques and all that type of stuff, and really good, just foundational stuff. When I got done, I wished I could go back through again with the knowledge I knew and actually make some recordings that sounded good the second time around. But it was a good experience, and it was it really got me, like I said before, more in love with the producing of music than just the playing a guitar and singing.
Yeah, indeed. I am actually a fellow alum from MTSU.
This world just keeps getting smaller.
It's just getting smaller and smaller. I don't know. You may have already known that. I don't know. But
I don't think so, no.
No, I graduated there in 95. So that's where I also started out. And when I finished school there, Or when I went into school, similarly to you, I really had no clue what I was doing. I just knew that I wanted to do it. You know,
Yeah.
I actually went to college first and got a degree in architecture
Oh,
and
wow.
and completed it because I didn't know anything about recording music. I didn't even know it was an option at the time.
Hmm.
So but I was playing in bands and really loved it, and finally decided I wanted to go to school and learn it. So it's a cool thing. So yet here you are, you know, having gone to school and gone through the experience of learning a bunch of stuff, and you've started a site to help people learn how to make their own records. Where do we begin?
I don't know. For me, I think realizing that the bulk of what I do, music and recording wise, was my own music and home studio stuff, which is there's a lot of similar things between making music in a home studio and making music in a big fancy $1 million studio. But obviously there are a lot of hurdles to jump over and a lot of workarounds to try to figure out to get your stuff to sound like you want it to sound. And I think the last decade or so, as the equipment and the software gets more and more accessible, and you've got people who buy a new laptop that has GarageBand on it already, who would have never even thought to get into recording, suddenly they're getting into recording. And they don't want to go all the way to, go to school for it, but they'd like to record their own songs in their band and expand on that more. And I think that's where sites like Home Studio Corner can come in and fill that gap of, they want to make professional sounding music, but they're still doing it in a home studio on the side as a hobby. And they just want to get better at this thing that more and more people are learning to get into. It's really cool.
Yeah. Well, so it's funny because I remember when GarageBand first made an appearance on the scene.
Mm-hmm.
And I also remember starting out, and the first thing that I did was get a 4-track recorder, a cassette 4-track, which I'm sure you did too. I guess the difference is when GarageBand appeared, the way you describe it, it just starts showing up on people's computers. When we first bought a guitar, it didn't come with a 4-track recorder. But when kids, when people first bought their laptops, it did come with GarageBand. So it's a really interesting distinction between that opportunity that exists today when somebody gets something that they're going to get anyway, a computer, and they discover that all of a sudden this world of, possibility of producing music is open to them.
Yeah, and a lot of people bemoan the fact that there's so much, anyone can make music, so there's so much bad music out there, which I guess is true. But also, to me, that's just exciting. It makes me think of when the printing press came out. I'm guessing all the scribes got pretty upset by this new technology that was making their jobs obsolete. But it was ultimately a really good thing for everyone. Anyway, that's the way I look at it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I like that. Well, so I want to talk about some of the stuff you're doing, and I also want to get into some deeper questions about, just the inspiration of getting into making music and everything. You have your site, HomeStudioCorner.com, where you're teaching people how to record music. You also have Dueling Mixes. Would you like to talk a little bit about that and what that is? That might be something that's for people as they get deeper into the process, perhaps. I don't know.
Sure. Yeah. Dueling Mixes is for the person who is comfortable in their software, and they've gotten to a point where they know how to put a mix together. Now they just want to rinse and repeat and do it over and over again and learn new techniques for making it sound better. It started, I had my website, and then this guy, Graham Cochran, had a similar website, therecordingrevolution.com. We quickly became friends, and I eventually asked him to do a podcast with me together. And after doing that for a few years, we did a few workshops here in Nashville, just kind of feeling out kind of ways we could work together. I was watching that show on the Food Network, Chopped, where you've got 4 contestants and they each get the same ingredients and have to make their own meal using the same ingredients, basically. And I started thinking, wouldn't it be great to hear how different people would mix the exact same song? Because you hear that mixing is such a subjective and creative experience, but you only end up hearing one person's mix of any given song. So you never really get to hear how it could sound different in different ways. The song could be mixed 2 completely different ways, but they each sound good, but they're very, very different. And that kind of got the wheels turning. And I threw the idea by Graham of doing, what if we both mixed a song and people we called it, some sort of battle thing. And we came up with the name Dueling Mixes, where he and I both mixed the same song. We put our mixes up for the members to listen to. They vote on which one they like better. But then they also download the tracks and mix it themselves. And then we each shoot a video where we show kind of an overview of, hey, here's how I mixed this month's song. Here's that trick I did on the vocals. Here's how I handled this problem with the drum recording, all that type of stuff. So it's much more, there's training involved and we're teaching, but it's much more an experience of getting in there and almost being mentored and having material to take back to your studio to pull up in your system and to mix yourself, and then kind of grab bits and advice and little tips and tricks from us along the way as you go.
And so are you guys also throwing in surprises like baby alligator and sea snake and giant beetle and things that they were throwing in on the cooking show?
Exactly.
Catch people off their toes.
Absolutely. There were, a couple months ago, there was a seagulls track in one of the songs we mixed. So, it's been a while since I'd got to mix seagulls. So there you go.
Was it a flock of seagulls?
A whole flock.
Wow. Awesome. Well, so that's very cool. And so that brings us up to your podcast too. I mean, you have the podcast that goes with Home Studio Corner. So any of our rock stars out there listening to this, looking for more podcast material to consume, it's a great place to go. Go listen to Joe teaching you about recording there. And then also Simply Recording podcast is the one that you host with Graham. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
I really enjoyed listening to your shows. I need to tell you that.
Thank you.
And you're welcome. And one of the shows was quite inspiring, and I'd love to just dive into that a little bit. You talked about a process that I think could resonate with everybody listening, whether they're into production, engineering, songwriting, because it involves sort of setting a real goal for yourself and trying to meet it and accomplish something and take whatever your skill set is now and take it to another level. And and you incorporated some really cool concepts like the 80-20 rule into it. So I'll just jump right to it. But you went through a pretty amazing process of creating your most recent record. I think it's your most recent album, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so would you like to tell us a little bit about that, about the album and what that was all about for you?
Yeah. So I released an album back in 2010. And original songs, did it in my home studio, that whole deal. And then a couple years later, I released an album, which was actually like a hymns album. So it wasn't songs I wrote. They were already written songs I just did new versions of. And so I was really itching after releasing that. I needed to write some more music. I didn't want to do someone else's songs. And I'd been through, running a business and doing all the stuff that I do. I read lots of business books, and the 80-20 principle comes up all the time, which if you're not familiar, it's just this idea that 80% of your results come from 20% of the inputs, basically. So you see it all over the place. If you look at a Michael Jordan, when he was at the peak of his career, he was the 20% that made the most money. And the next person on the team, the next highest salary was a fraction of what he made. That's kind of the idea. You see it all over the place. So I was thinking about that as it relates to songwriting. And the way I used to write for any album or EP project I would release was I write until I finished 10 songs and then I record them. And that's the new album. And it just didn't feel right because a lot of times 6 of those songs were just okay. I don't know if I would, if you said, hey, send me your best song, it wouldn't be one of those, right? So I started thinking, what would it look like if I had an album full of every song was one I was very proud of that had to make the cut, as opposed to just these were the next 6 that popped out of my brain. So I to just very literally take the 80-20 principle and try to apply it, I said, okay, if I wanted an album with at least 10 songs, then 10 is 20% of 50. So I've got to write 50 songs in order to get 10 good ones. And I thought about it and I said, you know what, let's just do it. So I did the stupid thing of announcing it to thousands of people on my website that I was going to write 50 songs in 12 weeks, to which I got a lot of people saying that was dumb and you can't force yourself to be creative and all this nonsense. But forced myself to do it and ended up actually hitting the goal. I got way behind and had to write 20-something songs in 2 weeks at the end to hit the deadline. But as it turns out, I narrowed it down to about 13 out of those 50 made it onto the next album. And it's one that I'm very proud of from a songwriting standpoint alone, just that I wrote a lot of songs that I'm happy with. My original cut, I cut from 50 down to 38 or something. I thought 38 were fantastic. Quickly, after letting other people hear them, they quickly hacked the rest of them away. But it was such a cool experience because I got into a rhythm. Any idea was a good idea because I couldn't afford to be picky with my ideas for songs. And so they just came out of me. And what's really interesting is in that last 2-week period where I was rushing to get finished, you'd think all those songs were garbage, right? Well, I think something like 8 out of the 13 songs on the album were written in that last 2-week period. So all the people who said all the things of you can't force creativity, you can't turn it into this factory, you can't. Well, I did, and I'm really happy with what resulted. So my reality was different from whatever it was you were predicting.
Well, as you suggested earlier, that last 20% of the time produced maybe 80% of the content that you use. It's pretty cool.
That was another case study, yeah.
Well, so, it does make me want to ask you some questions about that, because I think, again, I say this is applicable not just to somebody who wants to write a song and record it, but somebody might want to do something with their recordings in general or their mixes or take their recording business to the next level. When you're setting a goal, can you talk a little bit about how you were able to, did you look at your 50 songs and start at the deadline and find a way to reverse engineer that to the starting point so that you had your plan laid out? Or did you just jump in and say, I'm just going to, somehow or other, I'm going to make it to 50 when this thing's all done?
It was a little bit of both. I was at that particular moment in time, I was reading one of those kind of cute little goal-setting books that Zig Ziglar had written or something, and he talked about doing goals in 12-week increments. So I had 12 weeks on the brain when I decided to do the 50 songs. But then I thought, okay, if I'm working, 5 days a week, and I just write one a day, 5 times 12 is 60. So that gives me a couple weeks of buffer time. That feels reasonable, but also challenging. So that's kind of how I went about it. But with more like recording projects where I know, okay, I'm mixing 12 songs, I need to set aside, 12 initial mix sessions and then at least another 6 sessions to do revisions and stuff like that, and leave them maybe a couple extra buffer sessions for emergencies. Then that just literally is a matter of, okay, well, those take actual time. Once I block them on the calendar, okay, I guess I can get this done in 3 weeks or whatever the case is. But a part of that is knowing how long it's going to take you to do stuff, which needs to be an accurate guess, not just I can mix that song in 30 minutes, no problem. Like, well, that doesn't really help anybody. If that's
that's hard.
Happen.
That's hard to do, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And it's a matter of you try it and you book it, and then you realize, it took me twice as long. And over time you realize, okay, it actually takes me this long to do that, not, this long like I thought it was before.
Now, this is actually very relevant, I think, to you, me, all our listeners, is this idea, because we have to go through this every time we might need to predict or budget a record, for example, and trying to have some sense, if you're somebody who's working with clients and you want to record them and they come to you and say, well, how much is it going to cost to do a record? Bingo, right there. You've got to be able to start dissecting this process and figure out how much time you think you might need, set a goal for it, and figure that out. I always find that a bit challenging. I think it depends for everybody and it changes. But really there is that process of paying close attention to your own process while you're doing stuff so that when the question comes around, you feel like you have some sort of an answer. Sometimes you have to overanalyze your own process while you're doing it when nobody's asking how long it's taking you to do things, so that when somebody does ask you how long it's going to take, you have some kind of answer for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also, just kind of a side note there, it makes me think of, in those situations, we tend to want to figure out a way to make it as cheap as possible. Where do we cut corners in our plan to make that number seem arbitrarily more appealing because we think it's a better number to quote to them, when in reality we know we're not going to do it in 40 hours that we quoted. It's going to take 60 or something like that. And you end up shortchanging yourself all the time. There was just an example I told my buddy the other day. Somebody wanted to hire me to sing a vocal on a song. And I was just one of those weeks I did not want to do it. I didn't feel like it. So I quoted him 50% more than I normally quote because it'd be out of his budget and then I wouldn't have to say no and all that. And he comes back, sure, no problem. And instantly I'm rethinking everything, right? I guess, well, I'm going to do it now, but also I've been quoting too low. I've been quoting what I would pay when maybe reality people would actually pay what you think you're worth. So that's completely off topic, but it made me think of that when you were talking about budgeting your time. Budget enough and charge them for the extra time that it's inevitably going to take to do those final tweaks and stuff that they want.
No, I think that's very relevant. I think that any one of us who go through the process of deciding to record professionally, and basically that just, translation is you've decided that you want to make records, but you want to do it for hire for other people. So, you're going to make a record, they're going to pay you, has to go through that process of figuring out what is a reasonable rate, and I think most people starting out know that feeling of somebody asking, if they're available to do something, and you might say, well, yeah, sure. I mean, I typically do it for $100, but like I could do it for 25. And everybody struggles with that.
Yeah, which maybe as a temporary strategy, for that first couple of clients, maybe. But yeah, I think it would do so many people so much good. Like I mentioned, I worked at Sweetwater straight out of school, and it was a straight sales job, right? If I didn't sell stuff, I didn't get paid, which means we didn't pay our bills and eat. So I think that has had a huge impact on my ability to be able to, with a straight face, ask people for what I think this particular thing is worth. And I think if you're not, musician type, creative type, typically not the sales type as well, it would be worth, if not going and getting a sales job to learn it, reading a bunch of sales books or a good business book and taking some of those things to heart, because it'll make a difference in the way you approach those situations, even if it makes you more calm and you don't come across as panicky as you're trying to quote that number to them.
Yeah, really. Well, and then of course the converse to that is that when you do start out, it really is an opportunity in your life. If you're young, you're fresh out of school, you're in your 20s, that is a great time to just get the experience and just sort of say yes to everything for a bit while you're learning and just get as many experiences as you can. And if you're concerned about things like rates, maybe just don't even address it yet. Maybe just say yes and see what comes along until you get to a point where you really know what you're capable of and know what you want to do. And then that's where you start figuring it out.
Absolutely. We tend to want to obsess about the things that aren't problems yet.
Don't matter yet, right? Yeah. Oh yeah, that's
true.
They
will matter, sure, but it's not your current biggest problem.
That's never happened to anybody launching a podcast, for example.
I've launched 2 now, and I haven't done either of them the right way.
Right on.
So here you go. You can do it right for all of us.
All right, cool. Well, we're going to jump into the feel good metaphysical questions here too, and start asking things like, and maybe this is related to rates and doing recording for money or something like that. But can you go back and give us some of the best feedback or the best advice you sort of remember hearing when you were starting out in music, or maybe advice that you would love to give somebody who's starting out in music?
I think best advice, and I don't know where I first heard it, but it's kind of become a mantra, and people who are familiar with my podcast will roll their eyes because they'd heard me say it a million times. But the advice of getting it right at the source. I think we can get so caught up in the technology and all the cool things we can do once it gets into the software that it's really easy to just kind of gloss over and blow through the recording session. And does it not sound good? That's okay. We'll make it sound good later. I have so much more joy when I'm working on a project that we did the work on the front end during the recording process to make it sound amazing, to where the back end is more just tweaking a few things and having fun, as opposed to getting out all the tools and doing heavy lifting, trying to fix this mess that we created during a recording session. So I think it's a part of that, getting it right at the source, is remembering that this is about the music, not the equipment. And what comes out the other end of this process is a song that humans listen to, not a product that people are going to analyze and say, "Oh, wow, I really like the way he used that compressor on that lead vocal." Normal people don't do that. So it really helps me, even when I'm in the studio. I want to get so caught up in, let's just get this done, that I sometimes lose track of, oh, right, this is about a song and conveying an emotion. Let's try to keep that as we go through this whole complicated process.
Yeah, totally. So I'm actually going to do 2 things here. I'm going to respond to that, and I'm going to quote from an email of yours that just popped onto my phone just before we did this interview. So perfect. I want to point out that when you talk about getting it right at the source, I'm going to point out to our rock stars that the source is not the microphone.
Mm.
The source is the human being that's playing the instrument. It's the person, it's the song, it's the music that's coming out that goes into the microphone, right? And so this quote comes from the email which you just sent, and you quoted. I guess this might be from the book The Go-Giver. It says, "The most valuable gift you have to offer is yourself." Which is, I love that quote. I think that's great, and I'm always trying to remember that and to remind people of that. There's all kinds of gear and there's all kinds of equipment and there's all kinds of instruments out there, but ultimately, it's what you bring to those tools and to the whole process that adds the real value to what you're doing. And so don't ever forget that. That's where the real expression in your music and in your recordings and in your production and in your songwriting is going to come from. And I think it's one of the things that really is at the heart of the process that you did in writing your record that I love so much is you created that pressure cooker. I guess it's a pressure cooker, 50 songs in 12 weeks. It's a lot of pressure. And what that does is it strips away all the BS, right? So you didn't have time to overanalyze things. You didn't have time to make excuses for the equipment or the instruments or anything. It's almost like it strips everything away so that the only thing that was left was you.
Yeah.
And you just,
I think
that's what you had to put into your songs,
Yeah. And I think there's a place for sitting down with a new guitar pedal and just making noise until you find some cool things that happen, right? Sometimes you can't put a timer on that and you just explore and create. But I think there's also a time for this has got to be done by this time and it's going to be amazing and creative and good, but I'm also going to get it done before this deadline comes up because I need to.
Yes.
That doesn't necessarily hurt the quality or the creativity that's happening there.
Okay, you ready for metaphysical question number 2?
So ready.
What was an important failure or a setback that became perhaps a learning lesson for you in the studio or in your musical path journey?
For me, if I could put it on a graph and chart 2 lines, one showing my increase in knowledge of audio and recording and the other showing my output of music, you would see that the output of music was very high before I learned how to properly do things. And it started to go down as I learned more and more. It was as if back when I knew nothing about recording, I would record anything and everything. And in really horrible quality, I won't share with you. But as I learned how to do things the right way, it was suddenly there was this block of, well, I can't record guitar this weekend. I'm still working on my mic technique. So let's put that off. And that would happen for another year. And I would progressively release less and less music because I was learning more and more how to do it properly, which doesn't make any sense if you think about it. But at the same time, I was getting stuck with the almost a perfectionist mindset of I must wait until I've amassed the perfect collection of equipment so that I don't record anything inferior because now I've been enlightened and I know what good recordings sound like, and I can't record with this filth over here that only cost a few $100s. I must have the big fancy thing over there. And so for me, getting past that and realizing, golly, you can get the high-end stuff, but if you're still not very good at using it or you've not played your guitar in 6 months, who cares what equipment you used? It's going to sound like garbage. So that was something I wish, if I could go back, I wish I had been constantly creating music as I learned all this stuff. I feel like I missed a lot of fun opportunities to do that.
Yeah, I know that feeling. I mean, I started out with the love of music and playing in bands, and then I found myself, I sort of discovered that I had a capability to engineer because as I defined the first act of engineering was being the guy who knew how to put all the Radio Shack adapters together so that you could get something inputted into your 4-track. I was like, wow, I seem to be really good at this. I must be a recording engineer. And then, go to school. And then I started doing things like, all of a sudden I'd come back to record with my band and we'd try and get started. They're all ready to rock. And I'm like focused on putting an O-ring on the snare and telling them that there's a ring at 260 or something, like this crazy stuff that didn't really matter in our music at that point,
Right.
But the other funny thing about what you described to me is that you remember those first recordings you did, the ones that maybe weren't so good, but you were just cranking out music. Do you also remember having that experience afterwards of just listening to those recordings like crazy? That's what I did. Like I used to devour those recordings.
Yeah. And for me, it was devouring them. And the only thing I was ever thinking about was did I play that part right? Could I sing that part better? It was almost never about, I didn't even know what mixing was. So there wasn't questions of, did I EQ that right? It was all about, okay, that sounds weird. How can I go back and redo that to make it sound right? It was those questions that I have to force myself to ask now, but it was common sense before I knew better to just focus on what the performance was and if it was doing what I wanted it to do.
And let's be honest, if you were in a band and it was a band recording that you were also thinking, is my part loud enough?
Yeah, absolutely. Do I really sound that awful?
So, all right. So next up, tell us about a moment of success for you in recording, a point at which you felt like you had, you call it your hit moment.
Yeah, I think with writing those 50 songs, that was a big one, hitting that goal. But then narrowing it down and going through what ended up taking about a year to record and mix and release that album, got to a point where I was really excited about those songs. And then, you spend so much time with them, there's not that they don't mean that much to you anymore by the time you're done. I think for me, there was moments of feeling like, man, this is all a waste of time. It's not sounding great. And then listening through to all the songs and just being moved emotionally by the stuff that you were feeling when I originally wrote those songs, and it's still coming through months later when I've done all this other stuff to it. So for me, that's with almost every album. When I've been so close to it, nothing's new to me. I'm hearing everything, and it still moves me emotionally. Man, that's the moment. That, to me, when I feel that, I try to say, okay, stop, print it, done. Don't touch it anymore, because you've circled back around and made that connection again.
Yeah. And the record turned out great, by the way. It's a killer album. The record is called Better This Way. Mm-hmm. Do you want to let people know, since we're right here, right now, where they can find it and give it a listen?
Yes, sir. Go to joegildermusic.com.
Okay, cool. Awesome.
That'll take you there.
So, all right, next up, tell us about something you're excited about right now.
Right now, I think I'm most excited about getting back and writing some more. You'd think I'd be turned off to writing forever. But also, I want to do some writing in the studio with other musicians, at least my drummer, my bass player, and see what comes out. I feel like I've done the I'm going to sit and write and then you're going to play what I wrote thing several times. And I'd like to, having not really been in a band, full-on band for years, I think I want to get back and do something like that. So that's something I'm more excited about. People that walk in with some vague idea into the studio and come out with something that would not have happened if it was one person at a time. Yeah,
that's a lot of fun. A lot of great bands have composed that way, whether it's the Rolling Stones or U2. I know a lot of great bands will just go in and just think Zeppelin was recording that. It's Rush was recording that way. I hope I'm making references that don't make you want to hang up on me, but
nope. I like them all.
All right, groovy. But that process of just composing with people. And do you want to talk? We'll go on a segue here for a minute. How do you imagine capturing that writing process with a group of people in a band jamming like that?
I think for me, it would be, let's set up a recording session. This last album, Better This Way, we tracked drums, bass, and I was playing either keys or electric. We tracked all that live once I had picked the songs and done the arrangements. So it'd probably be the similar setup. Maybe add in one more musician who can play keys better than me. But then I think it would just be jamming until we come up with something and then dropping it, hitting record and laying it down right then and there. If nothing else, I use Presonus Studio 1 as my DAW, and they've got their new version has some cool arrange features. So we could just jam to a click, come up with a 16-bar phrase that's really cool, and move that around, loop that around, and start kind of building a track that way too, which all that kind of stuff of doing it more in the DAW as opposed to strictly in the real world and then recording it. That's intriguing to me too. Seems like there's some creative possibilities that I've not explored yet.
Yeah. And I'm right with you there on Presonus Studio 1. I was actually talking to those guys just yesterday. Okay. And for our listeners, we're actually talking right now. It's the time of NAMM, the big event here in Nashville where all the music merchandisers come and display their wares. And so the Presonus guys are here, and I don't know, Joe, are you going to go pay them a visit?
Yes, I'll be at there's an event they're doing tonight.
Oh, excellent.
I'll be going to.
Excellent.
Are you going?
I don't know if I'm going tonight, but I'm definitely going to drop in on them during the few days that they're here. And just for our listeners, one of the things that's really cool about Presonus Studio 1 is that it does give you that really easy sort of, it's almost like a hybrid of so many different things that are great about different recording apps because it has flexibility. It's got the speed of being able to compose in it. You can also move things around like big blocks of sound, like you might be familiar with in a GarageBand. And so it's a pretty cool tool. Plus the scratch pad seems really intriguing to me.
Yeah, I've never been one to write in a DAW, and that made me want to do that more than any other system has. So I'm excited to play with that.
Hi, I hope you are enjoying hearing from today's featured rock star. We are just about to head into the jam session, and I want to let you know that all the cool stuff we talk about will all be available in the show notes for this episode. If you would like me to send it directly to you, all you need to do is text jam session to 33444, and I'll send you free content, including the show notes. Again, that's jam session to 33444, and I'll send you free content, including the show notes. Cheers. All right, let's see here. I'm going to go on to the next question. So let's go into what I like to call the jam session. Just a series of quick questions, and just give me the first answer off the top of your head, or if you want to elaborate, that's fine. So this one is kind of like, what was holding you back from getting started in recording? It could be something that comes to mind as far as the song process or the album creation process, but what was holding you back at the start? How might that apply to somebody who's getting started themselves?
Feeling like I had to do everything myself. Almost always in music or life, it works better when there's other people involved.
Nice. That's good. Yeah, especially if there's an element of accountability to it.
Yeah. Absolutely.
For example, I scheduled a podcast interview with you today, and I was accountable to show up and make sure my computer was working. We had a few technical issues at the start of this for our listeners. All right. So how about a recording tip, hack, or secret sauce that you would like to share from your experience?
This might tie into maybe another question you may have later, but for me, I guess really just when it comes to electric guitar, a lot of guys want to record as clean as possible and then add all the stuff later. And I've just gotten have so much fun by committing on the front end. If I want a delay, it's going to be there in the recorded signal. I can't go back and take it out later. And that just adds kind of that pressure to create something and an experience that it gets locked down on that audio file and you can't go undo it later. And I try to experiment more with that, with not only electric, but other things where what all can I do to make the sound that gets laid down to tape, so to speak, sound like I want it to sound in the mix without having to go through and do all the mixing. Yep.
I've talked about that with a lot of people, just the power of commitment and making decisions about things. I don't think Jimmy Page was recording his guitar direct and hoping to add a bunch of effects later on when he finished out the record.
Oh, it just makes it so boring.
All right, so let's see. Where am I here? Do you have a favorite book maybe that you've been reading that you'd like to share that people would dig and enjoy, whether it's music or business or whatever aspect is exciting to you now?
I love The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield.
Great book.
It is. If your butt's not in gear and you'd like it to be, that's a good one.
And that one is very relevant in terms of the writing process that you were talking about, because it really is all about show up on time every day and, just show up for whatever your process is, whether it's writing, whether it's mixing, whether it's learning to record better, whether it's live music, and just make an appearance, because what's going to happen is on the days that you're not so good, nobody's ever going to know about them.
Yeah.
And on the days that you're brilliant, you're going to be there and you're going to capture it. And then, people might know about it.
Yeah. I feel like Stephen Pressfield, that book gave me permission to write a bad song.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
And I could get through a couple of bad ones for that good one to come out that was waiting in the queue.
Well, groovy. All right. So now can you share a favorite hardware tool for the studio? Anything from a tuner to a mic to some favorite piece of gear that you're using?
Blasphemy though it may be, I love the Avid 11 rack.
Nice.
Just the different guitar tones I'm able to get. And I keep trying to not like it, and I keep failing. It sounds great. I really like it.
And that's hardware because you have to plug your guitar into it.
Exactly. And I actually do run I don't even use the software part of it. I just messing with knobs on the front and run an audio out to my interface.
Does yours have the mic pre input as well?
It does, yeah.
Now, the word on the street is that that's actually quite a good mic preamp.
I've only used it for like a silly podcast intro to run my voice through a guitar amp. So I don't know. Couldn't tell you.
I haven't used it myself yet. I just heard that. All right. So now how about a favorite software tool for recording? Something like a plugin or a DAW, or, I mean, you mentioned one, Studio One, Presonus.
Yeah, I think that would be mine. Presonus Studio One. I was a hardcore Pro Tools guy for a long time, and they wooed me over, and suddenly, literally, the computer's sitting in front of me. I don't have Pro Tools installed. If you sent me a Pro Tools file, I would not be able to open it.
Wow, that's exciting, man. It's like writing 50 songs in 12 weeks. Sometimes you just have to step off the edge of the creative cliff. I guess that's a good analogy. So you can't turn back.
Or crazy. I'm not sure which.
Let's use a hang gliding analogy. That's a little safer.
There you go.
Once you get going, you can't just like let go.
Yeah, exactly.
So, how about this? So you had mentioned that DAW as an option. Would you like to just drop a reference to one favorite new feature that exists in it that you're liking a lot right now?
Actually, they have a new feature that I don't know if it's in other DAWs. I don't spend a lot of time looking at other DAWs, but that lets you basically route the plugin chain on any channel and to split the signal and do different things and put different plugins on different parts of the signal, all within one plugin chain. So you can do built-in a whole parallel series of plugins on your drum bus without having to create a new bus. It's all done right within the track itself. It's a really interesting, I've only just begun to scratch the surface of it, but being able to split up the audio between different frequency ranges and process those differently, and then also just processing left and right differently, or processing half the audio with no processing and then throwing distortion and compression on the other half and seeing what that sounds like blended together. It's really, really interesting.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. So to go back to your guitar reference, This is a situation where you could record a guitar and on a single guitar track or a single stereo guitar track, split the sound, go through some different effects of this sort and different effects of that sort, and really treat it. Even probably build a stereo guitar out of it, and then kind of have it committed inside the plugin there. But you could still have access to it later. Oops, I shouldn't have suggested that. Anyway, yeah, I love that feature. That's very cool.
Yeah.
All right, so let's see. How about a great resource for the business part of the recording studio?
I'm going to say my buddy Graham Cochran, he released a program about making an income on the side or as a full-time as an audio guy freelance. It's called the Audio Income Project. I'm not affiliated with it at all. I've just heard so many people rave about how cool it's been for them. And I'm really good friends with Graham, and I trust stuff that he does. But the website's audioincome.com. But he just kind of maps out kind of what he did for years of being, just like you're talking about, being a studio rock star, making it work.
Yeah, that's awesome. Great resource. I love that. All right, so last question is, if you were dropped into a strange city and you could only take a simple setup for recording, what would you choose? How would you find people to record? And how would you make ends meet right away so that you could continue recording? This is the story of every young person who's moved to Nashville, New York, LA, exactly. And they're like starting out, or any other city now at this point.
I think for the rig, it'd be a laptop with probably one of the Presonus audio box, couple input interfaces, Studio One, obviously, and I just take a mic, whatever mic you want to give me. And then I think as far as getting recording work, you got to go to where the musicians are and find them. I wouldn't be posting on Craigslist and waiting for them to come to me. I'd figure out where they are, where they're playing and where they're hanging out, and go start relationships right away. And I think a big thing was I would give value first. Nobody likes the guy who says, "Hi, I'm so-and-so. Can I have your money?" That's hard to, it doesn't really work, right? And you tend to want to give your money and work with people you've had a relationship with who've offered you some sort of value. I don't know what that would be for you, but for me, it would be, offering to record something for free perhaps, or, offering to help with the show, just whatever it could be to start to actually be helpful and valuable for them. And then as far as, and also I would connect with people who have already connected with them, if that makes sense. So if they all play with this one guitarist or this one drummer who plays with all the musicians in town, I'd like to know that guy and figure out ways to help him and make his life better. And then maybe some stuff would come of that too. Yeah. That's kind of where I would get started.
Now, so I'm going to put a little twist on it. What if somebody is in a town where there really aren't that many musicians locally? What if they are more interested in learning how to, say, mix or master, and they want to sort of develop an online presence? Have you found any great resources or places for people to go and interact and have a dialogue with people online at all?
Yeah, there's obviously with the way things are going online, you can do everything we're talking about can be done without ever meeting the person in real life. Like you and I live in the same town, but we just happen to both stay home and do this interview. So it's it's just bizarre how crazy we can do that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think there's lots of communities. I mean, I have, I'm obviously biased. I've got a membership with a VIP membership at my site where there's a forum where they hang out, and a lot of those members have started working on each other's music. And, the guy who plays drums is playing for these 3 people, and that guy plays guitar, and he's playing on these 3 people's projects and stuff like that. It's just fun. It's mostly just so they can practice and do their craft more because, like you said, they live in the middle of Utah where there's just no musicians around to mess around with. But I think it's certainly not limited to Home Studio Corner. I think there's obviously a bunch of audio forums and whatnot. Crowdaudio.com. My buddy Bjorgvin started that a couple years ago. It's a cool place where it's kind of crowdsourcing for mix engineers. So they'll post a song. Are you familiar with Crowd Audio?
Yeah, I'm familiar with Bjorgvin. In fact, I'm going to be speaking to him later today. And
cool.
And I don't know a lot about Crowd, but I do know that he's a big part of that.
Yeah, it's a cool idea where you can, if you're aspiring mixer, you can go there and an artist will post their song, and then you can kind of do a mix of it, and then they pick the best one, and that's the person that gets paid, if that makes sense. So obviously you don't want to do a bunch of work if you have to get paid on that work, but if you're trying to develop your skill and then potentially win the job and get paid on it, it's a cool place for exactly the kind of person you're talking about.
Yeah, or you could just go out into the real world of mixers and do the exact same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's not that uncommon, right? That people might approach mixers and ask for a few people to see if they'll mix one track and see how it goes.
Yeah,
I don't recommend it a whole lot, but it does exist.
Yeah, I just had one of my VIP members say, "What do I do when this guy didn't pay me, but I went ahead and gave him all the masters?" And I said, "Well, you're done." So
you turn on the radio and hope you get to hear your mix back later.
You write this down and frame it and remember it, because you'll avoid it next time. You'll make sure you protect yourself a little.
Yeah,
more.
let's pull this full circle. Hopefully, that process for that person included keeping track of their time and really logging the process for themselves, so that next time somebody comes around and knows it, they sort of know what they're committing to do. They know that it's going to take them an hour, 4 hours, whatever, however long it took them to do that mix, and they know that they're sort of about to give away that much value.
Absolutely.
Well, right on. So, Joe, can you let our rock stars know how they can find out more about you? I know we've already said so, but let's make sure we list all the ways they might follow you, learn more about you. Also, I want to follow up what you just said with saying, of course, the baked-in answer is that any of our listeners can go to Dueling Mixes, and there's a built-in community right there for them to learn more about mixing.
Sure.
Interact with people. That's a great way to find people and peers that you want to interact with online right off the bat.
Totally.
So yeah, tell us how we can find you.
Yeah, the best place is just HomeStudioCorner.com, and you can sign up. I've got an email that I send out pretty regularly. You can check that out. Simply Recording Podcast, if you want to subscribe to that and hear me and Graham talk about all sorts of fun stuff. And then social media wise, if you want to come say hi, Twitter and Facebook, it's just twitter.com/Joe Gilder Music. Facebook, same deal. Joe Gilder Music.
Right on, Joe. Well, thanks so much for joining us on Recording Studio Rockstars. Our guest, Joe Gilder. Really honored that you would come hang out with us.
Well, it's been super fun. I'd love to do it again sometime.
Groovy. Thanks, man. We'll see you around town.
All right.
Cheers. Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, please leave a rating and review on iTunes to help reach more people. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to recordingstudiorockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And if you want more free content, all you have to do is text RS Rockstars to 33444. Again, that's RS Rockstars to 33444, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, and podcast updates. And I'll let you know about any upcoming giveaway offers, all totally free. Thanks for listening. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music.